Welcome back to the Fleeting Conversations podcast. My name is Matthew Leffler. I'm the armchair attorney. For those of you who know me, you know I love trailers. You know I love supply chain. And you know I love truck drivers. Safely delivering freight on time and undamaged remains one of the most difficult and dangerous jobs in the entire country. And yet, it remains one of the most common professions in every single state of the union. Whether you see it at your doorstep, whether you find it on the shelf, everything came on a truck. And that's what this podcast is all about, helping you understand, helping me understand, how do the things that we need get to us? What has to happen to make all of that possible? What kind of orchestration do you have to do to achieve that goal? Now, I got to give a quick shout out to my partner with DAT. Man, I love DAT. Since 1978, DAT has been helping truck drivers eliminate empty miles, helping people get home safely. Because the goal of trucking has always been, and will always be, getting you home in the same condition that you left. And having technology like DAT helps you do that profitably, helps you move freight from one place to another. And I am such a big fan of them and their partnership with our program. You'll see in the show notes some discount codes. If you're a trucker, we can get you a discount on DAT, 12 months, 10% off. Brokers, same thing. We have a great list of products. They'll be in the show notes if you're interested. But the reality is, what I want to talk about today, what I want to start off talking about today, is the risk that we see all around us. And it is substantial. Right now, the most important case in logistics is unfolding in Texas. Let me paint the picture for you. And it is not a pretty picture. Many years ago, a driver for Werner Enterprises was traveling on a road going below the posted speed limit. There was inclement weather. There was snow on the ground. And this driver never lost control. The machine was operating with all the maintenance that it needed. It was a safely moving piece of equipment. In the back of the truck, in the back of the sleeper was another trainer who was sleeping. And the most unimaginable thing happened. In the opposite lane of traffic, a pickup truck lost control. And that pickup truck crossed the median, 12-yard median, and collided head-on with the driver for Werner Enterprises. The outcome was as horrifying as you could ever imagine. One child died, one suffered severe and significant trauma. My career in transportation began as an attorney representing trucking companies in just such cases. And this case went to trial in Texas. And in that trial, the driver of the four-wheeler, the pickup truck, was found partially liable. The driver for Werner was also found partially liable. For the driver for Werner, their liability was assessed at 14%. For the driver for the four-wheeler, their liability was assessed at 16%. But the vast majority of the liability was on Werner Enterprises, the motor carrier. And that verdict was over $100 million. When you add in the interest that is continuing to accrue, that number is over $130 million. Now, operating a truck is difficult even under the best circumstances. It is a dangerous job, as it always has been and will likely always be. But how do you prepare for someone else in the opposite lane of traffic to lose control, cross the median, and collide with you? There is almost no way any driver can anticipate that sort of risk. And on appeal, that case was affirmed in Texas. That verdict was upheld. And right now, it is sitting before the Texas Supreme Court. They will soon be weighing in on this absolutely critical case. In trucking, we know the costs. We've known the costs for decades. Most expensive thing generally for a trucking company is fuel. The number two is labor. Number three is the equipment, the truck, the trailer. Number four is maintenance. And five and six are insurance and tires. Those are the things that you spend the most amount of money on. And if you look at this verdict, there's only one outcome. Insurance rates are going to go up for everyone because that's how insurers help understand and mitigate risk. Now, insurance is an interesting topic, and I'll briefly talk about this before I bring on my incredible guest, Adam Wingfield, in just a moment. Right now in Congress, there is an act, there's a bill that's being looked at. And if I'm not mistaken, its title is the Fair Compensation for Truck Crash Victims. These acts have interesting names, oftentimes meant to make you feel a certain way. But at the core of this potential act is one very specific thing: raising the minimum insurance rates for motor carriers. Now, the rate of insurance that a motor carrier has to have right now, minimum, is $750,000. $750,000. That number was established in 1980. We have not increased our amount of insurance for truck companies at all in 44 years. Now, the question is, will this bill pass? Probably not. But we have to look at the world from the lens of risk management. If you are a trucking company, if you are a broker, or if you are a manufacturer, who we typically call shippers, you need to understand that case down in Texas. You have to understand the risks that are out there. And you also have to understand that insurance is going to continue to rise. It is not going anywhere, but it is important for you to understand what is at stake. Now, that brings me to bringing in my guest, Adam Wingfield. Adam is an incredible man who began his career as a truck driver. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and his experience. He's also a track runner, so we're going to talk about some numbers as well. But what he does right now with his company, the Innovative Logistics Group, is help people understand how to become profitable business owners in the transportation space. His knowledge in this industry is as expansive as it is deep. And I am so excited to welcome the one and only Adam Wingfield. Adam, how are you?
Good afternoon, and how you doing, Matthew? Everything going okay?
I am living La Vida Loca, man. This is a beautiful day. It's Friday. My kids have school off, so there might be some screaming in the background. For right now, though, everything's looking good. How are you doing, sir?
Man, I'm doing great. It's Friday. It's a little dreary out here. You know, my daughter just called me from school, told me that the power is out. So no telling what's going to happen with that, but it's still a great day, man. It's the first of the month. It's March 1st. It's the first day of reefer season. It's the start of the spring. It is just exciting to move into almost a different chapter of the year. It's time to start smelling all of that pollen and start sneezing again.
I have been facing the seasonal allergies for a very long time. We had 70 degrees here just a couple days ago, and now it's below 30. So it's really quite wonderful. I have a question for you.
Sure.
How in the world did you get started in transportation?
So I got started in transportation from at the very ripe age of 6, 7 years old, when all I had interest in doing is I had a neighbor who was a truck driver. He had an old Mack truck and a reefer trailer. It was a 45-foot reefer trailer and a Mack truck, and it would just when I was younger, it would excite me when he would come home every 3.5, 4 months. But I was always attracted to heavy equipment. I was always attracted to the smell of diesel smoke. I don't know why that was the case. I used to love watching the mobile choo-choo trains going down the highway back in the day. So, of course, when DEF became a thing, I started missing seeing the black smoke going in the air. But no, in all seriousness, it's always been one of the things in my life that I was always attracted to doing. You know, I had Matchbox trucks, and I would have these dining room table setups where I had warehouses, I had highways, I had truck stops, I had all that good stuff, because that was something that I was always attracted to. I was always attracted to engines and things like that. When I became 11 years old, I got behind the wheel of a truck, coincidentally, with my uncle, and rest is history.
That's incredible. Like I find so many people in this industry, they got started either, very young by admiring trucks or people in the business, like family members. For my own self, like we got started, my dad was a roadway guy back in 76, spent years doing that. And then he worked for Airborne before they got bought by DHL. And then it was 91 when he started his maintenance and repair company, and the smell of diesel, the diesel shops, there is nothing better. There's nothing better than being able to go into a shop and talk to mechanics and watch the industry unfold. When did you get behind the wheel driving professionally? When did that decision happen for you?
I got my CDL my birthday when I turned 21 years old. Schneider National was a carrier that I admired highly because it was right around the corner from one of their OCs, was right around the corner from where I lived. And I just went up there one day, actually I filled out an application and called online, and they had a CDL training program, and I got in their training program, and immediately, as soon as I was able of legal age to get my CDL, I went through their program, and I got my CDL at the time.
That's incredible. Like the mega carriers, like these companies expanded so massively after deregulation. The truckload world became this ultra competitive, razor thin margin, but incredible growth. What was it like training at Schneider for you?
Let me tell you, I'll be honest with you. It was one of the most comprehensive, dynamic, and most detail-oriented training that I can ever imagine going through. It was a really good experience. The focus was so heavily on safety. They had top-notch trainers. They had top-notch facilities. And I remember going to the skid pad. I don't even know if that still exists, but they had a skid pad up in Wisconsin that we would have to train on. That trained you on how to handle a semi-tractor in the event that you go into a jackknife situation due to weather. But I learned so much, man. It was a very, very good experience, especially the in-class experience. And then obviously when we went to the over-the-road experience, when we got, tied to a trainer, it was very, very different. I had a couple of different trainers based on, because I was an actual specialized driver. So I did heavy haul and we hauled glass. And because I went through that, we had to go, train, getting the CDL, but then we had flatbed securement training and specialized training. And so that means I had two different on-the-road trainers for two different scenarios.
That's really interesting. So before we went live on this thing, you and I were talking about training, and I want to go back to that Werner case we were just talking about. Now, my understanding was in that circumstance, we had a driver who was operating there 7 days in, and their trainer was in the berth. So essentially, the trainer was acting kind of like a team. Is that typical in the industry from your experience?
So I can only speak on my experience. And what I will tell you is that I've had experience from both sides. I had experience with my first trainer, road trainer, who, when I was up in the wheel, he was sitting beside me. He was a fantastic trainer. He sat there the whole time, attentive, giving feedback, making sure that, if I had any situations, he was able to kind of lean in on. But then I also had a trainer as well that, was really a surprise to me. That was just that, I got behind the wheel, he hopped in the bump. And really back then, you got to remember, they're still paid by the mile, and they also, obviously that's still one of the things that leaned into it. But the second trainer that I had, we operated just like a team, man. I would sit behind the wheel during the day. He would get back there and grab a nap, or sometimes he'd be in the seat there grabbing a nap. When he drove, he had me in the back. He wanted me to make sure that I would take a nap back there when he drove. But the funny thing about it is that even one thing I would witness when he would drive, he would pop up the little fuse box. And when he popped up the little fuse box, he would hit a disconnect button. That disconnect was connected to our Qualcomm. So so what that tells me, and I'm saying that because it's the reality, right? What that tells me is that, still the driver to this day is force and pressure, even in a scenario dynamic where you become a training engineer or a trainer, where you're getting compensated even a little more, still being forced to push the limits of safety, push the limits of what they're supposed to do in order to kind of make a living, man. But yeah, I'll never forget that experience. The guy was military. Both of my trainers were military guys. They had ex-military guys, but it was two totally different experiences.
Well, so after you drove for Schneider, where did you go next? What did you do after that?
So I went to a company called Prime Inc., which is, we all know of Prime. I mean, that took me to
New Prime
Incorporated, which was another fantastic operation out there in Springfield, Missouri. Very top-notch facility. Again, I didn't have to go through their training though, because obviously at that time I was already trained at that point. But that was my first taste to kind of being on my own, because at that point, I went to their own operator program, and then obviously that gave me the opportunity to be on my own. The thing that I did learn from New Prime is I learned more about the business side. That's when I really, really learned the business side of things. But what I saw is, so, even in training at that point, What I saw is you had the head of the class folks that were sitting there taking notes, asking questions, doing all those things. But then you saw a lot of people that were behind the class folks that didn't show up, that weren't learning the things that they needed to learn in terms of the business side of things, that were really just focused on give me the keys and let me go about my business. But it was a very, very interesting experience. The dynamics from a training perspective were different because they were different use cases. But I can tell you that from a training perspective, and just, obviously ongoing training and obviously the importance of safety, I can't speak negatively on the mega carrier experience. I can't.
Were you hauling temperature control with Prime, or were you doing dry van stuff?
I did flatbed with Prime.
Oh, flatbed. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, flatbed with Prime.
I love flatbeds, like at the Apatow flooring, like in the maintenance world, like that is one of the most interesting jobs to do, is like replacing all of the floor, all the decking materials. They get abused. They get put through the work. How long were you with Prime for?
So I was with Prime for quite some time. Let me tell you the thing, the reason, and this is gonna sound weird, but the reason why I didn't want to do any enclosed temperature control or dry van in the very, very beginning is because I hated appointment times. I promise you, that is the only
That's
reason.
right.
Because let me tell you, flatbed work is hard. It's hot out there. There's tarping, there's chaining, there's securement, there's load checks, there's all that stuff. There's extra work that you got to do. But the thing that used to kill me is that when I load up and I go to my destination, I want to drop off. I don't want to wait.
That's
and
right.
One thing flatbed was always, you just pull up and just get unloaded. I was like, man, appointment time. And I mean, they would have the weirdest appointment times, like 1:45 a.m. or 2:13 a.m. And it's like, you don't get there and it lumpers and all that stuff. I didn't want to deal with it. But quite frankly, that when I actually started going into more of the fleet side, and when I started, doing my own thing, I started getting reefers. So it's just weird, man. My whole journey is just weird, man.
Well, what I find so fascinating is, like, it's for me, the freight is interesting, but the real thing that I find the most compelling is the fleet, like the mechanical, the equipment that's there, what has to be done to maintain it. Those parts really interest me, and I'm kind of curious. So you went from doing Schneider, you went to doing Prime. What happens after that? So you've gone to 2 for-hires. Did you ever get into other types of trucking companies?
Nah, those are 2 for-hires that I focused on. Those are I gained so much experience on the Prime side that led me to graduate to do my own thing, and that's when I became just went out on my own and went under the own US DOT number and started doing your own thing. But the thing about it is, with me, I wanted to learn trucking from the inside out. I always wanted to own my own trucking company. I wanted to have a massive trucking operation. I always wanted to do that, but I wanted to learn from the inside out. I wanted to learn from the blue collar side. I wanted to be a driver first. And I'll never forget, there was an old head, and I'll never forget the conversation that he had with me. And I told him exactly what I wanted to do. And he was a driver for a long time. And he said, man, you're too smart for this, man. He said, man, do something different. And I was like, man, at that time, I was like, man, leave me alone. I want to get behind the wheel of a truck. I want to do my own thing. But even to this day, I hear his voice in the back of my head, just like, man, focus on the big picture. Focus on, his point was solve the problems. Help come out there and be better use of the time. Let's use you better, right? So that's what kind of led me to the whole space of more of education side of it, because I put plenty of time behind the wheel, man. We're talking about 1 million miles and all that good stuff. I had plenty of time behind the wheel, but the things that I learned and things that I saw out there, I want to help fix. The things that I saw, especially on the independent side, on the owner-operator side, the things that I watched. Like I said, we was in those Prime classes, and they did a really, really good job at Prime of going there, owner-operator classes, when they were teaching the business side and how to manage the business. They really, really tried, man. But it's grabbing that attention is one of the things that they weren't able to accomplish. And they had a lot of people that failed, because you would see on the lot, you'll see, because they got a Freightliner dealership there in Springfield that they feed a lot of their trucks from. But then you would see all of the trucks that were coming off lease that, obviously folks that didn't finish the lease, or folks that quit. It was just a constant cycle of turnover there. But that's where our passion came from, man. That's really, 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 really boiled down to.
Well, at what point in your career did you realize that you can't get out of supply chain? Like, did that crystallize for you at this point, or are you still waiting for that moment?
No, I think that for me, man, it's always been part of what I wanted to do. It's like, man, a lot of people have a passion for certain things. And I believe that when you're passionate about something, that it never becomes work. And, whenever I tried to do anything outside of supply chain, even from a thought perspective, where it's like, hey, I'm trying to do other things, it didn't mean anything. I didn't get the same feeling out of it. But when I look at supply chain, especially on the independent trucker side, on the small carrier side, I see so much opportunity to help people. And that's my thing. I'm a coach at heart, right? I'm an athlete. We talk about it. We laugh and joke about it all the time. But like at the end of the day, I'm a coach at heart. I want to help people win. And then I see so many people that all they need is an extra push, or they need a little bit more information, or they need a little bit more, someone that can kind of lead and push the flock to the right direction. Because I'll be honest with you, there are so many organizations out here, even lobbying organizations, that are pushing so much of the things that are not actionable, things that a carrier can't do. I want to be that one, and I want to make sure that we provide the guidance that carriers can do to make them succeed in the industry. And that's really what kind of boils down to, man. I'm passionate about people. I love people. I love trucking. It'll never leave my blood. I tell you, to this day, I can still smell diesel fuel in my nostrils, even in my office. And it's like, it's one of those things that you can never get out of your blood, man.
I love that you say that, because like I fundamentally believe that the greatest innovation in supply chain in the last, let's say 60 years, maybe containerization back in the 60s, that was super important. But I think the biggest innovation is independent contractors, like being able to be independent from the main entity and be a business owner. And I remember so vividly, I was 6 or 7 years old when my father had a chance to start his own company. What he was doing was he was approached by RPS, Roadway Package System, and they said, we need to get someone to maintain the equipment that's not an employee. We need to have you as a business owner employ the contractors that are apply your mechanics to service our fleet. And FedEx Ground, I mean, they were the pioneers of the independent contractor model. I mean, they've been doing this a long time. And I look at it now and I say, well, now the entire supply chain is so different than it was 44 years ago, from when 60% of drivers were unionized. It was all heavily regulated. And you look today, and as an owner operator in this environment, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. Like, what are you seeing from your clients and it comes like how to navigate an environment like this?
Thing about it is there's a lot of things that are in it, but it's also the element of things that's continuously changing. So your regulations are continuously changing. You have guidelines that are continuously changing. You've got a motor carrier guide that's that thick that at any point, a federal inspector, if anything came down to it, they expect you to know these things like your back of your head. They expect the one truck owner operators to operate like they have a huge compliance team. They expect the single truck owner operators to operate like they've got maintenance facilities at their beck and call. And the pressure behind an owner operator to stay on top of that stuff. And when you layer on and you pepper on the fact that now I have to make sure that I'm compliant, but then also the time I've got to focus on the thin margins that I'm operating in. When you look at an independent driver, even from a standpoint, a company driver versus an IC, an owner operator, is the juice really worth the squeeze? So the pain points that you see is like, you know what, I might as well just go, drive for Domino's or something like that.
Yeah, go drive for Uber, go DoorDash. I
mean, from that perspective. But the thing that hurts me is because, you look back and you go back several years ago, even when I first started driving a truck 24 years ago, actually, when you go back to that point, there was pride, there was a level of pride, there was still that, the knight in shining armor on the road there. But as it's exploded in terms of just, I don't even want to say popularity was the reason why it exploded, but you see so many folks that just want to have that opportunity to go out there, independent, live the American dream of entrepreneurship. But then when they get to the other side of it and they realize the amount of things that are being circumvented through the process, it makes it so difficult, man. And I remember, Matthew, I'll never forget, man. It was one of the first loads I ever pulled to Louisville, Kentucky from Warrenburg, North Carolina. And I got to a truck stop there in Louisville, man. And, I'm getting ready to go jump out and take a shower, man. And I got out there, man, and I opened the door to the truck stop and I go inside, man. And it just, the feeling that I felt, honestly was almost like I don't want to say an underworld, but it was just so, you could see the pain on people's faces. They had like the little smoking sections where you can, they call them, professional drivers only lounge. And you can hear the things that they were talking about. And Matthew, the things that they were talking about back in 2000, for me, back in 2000, in October of 2000, they're talking about the same things now.
Yeah.
Where's the progression? Why are we not progressing? And that's one of the things that when your question, it goes right directly to that. It seems like all this time, 24 years, if you put 24 years of work and dedication and progress in any other industry, right? Matthew, people still sign bill of ladings with like signatures. Like a big pin.
We don't have the margins for innovation, Adam. That's the problem.
That's it. There's margins somewhere. We're talking about almost $1 trillion industry. We're still requiring big pins at a shipper. We're still not allowing our drivers, who are the most important component of the supply chain, to pull up at a shipper and use the restroom facilities. We still don't have adequate parking with the increase in demand of folks that are actually ordering stuff now, in which the pandemic drove. And we didn't consider the fact that there's going to be more trucks on the highway. They need to find safe parking. Those are things that I can go on and on about that.
Yeah, well, you hit a nail on the head here. And my dog is making noises, so I apologize for anyone listening to her squawking. But the thing that I want to emphasize here is every problem that we have with the supply chain right now, challenges as drivers, compensation, parking, speed regulators, all that kind of stuff. These are not new problems. To your point, this has been the problem since time immemorial. But a lot of the problems we have, I feel, are features of our supply chain, not bugs. Like, it was designed when deregulation happened in 1980, the average truck driver was making about $38,000 a year. But you adjust that for inflation, that's $120,000 a year. You can put a kid through college. You can buy a car. You can buy a house. The goal of the Motor Care Act was to take $8 billion in that time's money out of the cost of transportation. And they did that off the backs of drivers, material handlers, mechanics. And we look at today and go, why is it still like this? This is what they wanted. Not to be very cynical about it, but this is what happens when you deregulate and you fragment and everyone competes for the scraps, and you're left with an owner-operator who wants to be an independent business owner, but they have an ELD mandate. They're going to have a speed regulator mandate. They're going to have every single thing under the sun, and it's all off of their backs. Like, how do we think about this business, that being the fact that we have to see every day?
And the crazy thing about that, when you go back to deregulation, and right around that time of deregulation, 3PLs didn't exist, right?
That's right.
So you didn't have 3PLs that you have to layer in. So now not only they're fighting those things that you're talking about, but now they're fighting 3PLs. And then as 3PLs and freight fraud becomes even more complex, now they're forced to fight other things like, hey, you don't have enough inspections. So it's always something that's always being peppered in. And then that driver's experience is not getting any better. And that's the thing that I always will be a voice for, because, obviously spending that much time, away from my kids, spending that much time behind the wheel, seeing those things that I saw out there for the time that I spent out there, it's a pain point for me. But then, like I said, when I go back to October of 2000, when I shifted my first gear to now, from the pain that we saw back then, it's actually exasperated, but they're not being compensated. But here's the issue, though. Fair compensation, and that's one of the things. We look at the whole broker transparency, and you start hearing all of this stuff, and things like that. And I think that Ken did a good job with DAT.
Oh, I love Ken Adamo. He's a great dude. Love Ken.
Really, really good. Yeah, if you haven't seen that illustration that Ken put out there in regards to the contract and spot difference, when the whole IKEA convoy thing. So, and you saw the difference between the margins there. But one of the things that we're continuously fighting up against is that the transparency from a visibility standpoint, from a rate perspective, is actually seeing fair compensation to when it gets downstream to the actual driver and what they feel is. I think that when you continuously require more, you got to pay more. When you require more, you got to pay more. I've never been able to order an Uber, Matthew, and make them wait on me and not get charged for it. But yet our drivers, right, that really, when you look at that piece of machinery that could cost anywhere potentially between $80 to $100 an hour just to sit.
Yeah.
Our drivers are getting paid $30 an hour or $20 an hour to be detained, which I'm glad that the FMCSA has decided to dig into, but this is nothing new. This has been the same issues that we're seeing. So what is the progress?
One of the things that I get really frustrated about is seeing like rates that are underneath the operating cost of a truck. Like, we know what it costs to operate that truck every hour, how much it costs per mile. Like, it's knowable. It's very easily knowable. And yet we still, as a society, want that ever faster, ever cheaper experience. And that's at the expense of safety. That is at the expense of the American public on the roads. And what do you do in that situation?
Well, let me say this. So to your point on that, some do know, some don't know, and some don't care. I remember when I put a post out on LinkedIn, it was a couple of years ago, when it's talking about the operating cost of a truck. And you should see the amount of, I know there's some 3PLs on here, but you're not going to like what I'm about to say. But you see the amount of 3PLs and brokers say, why should I care? Why should I care? Matt, why should I care how much it costs for you to operate your truck? I'm just here to move freight. And I'm an intermediary. It's not my freight nor your freight. I'm a middleman. Why should I care? Yeah, well, that's the problem, because we have that intermediary in place. And like you said, and to your point, like, okay, you know what, the cost of operating a truck, we all know, but a lot of people don't know. And the operation of operating a truck is contingent. It very much varies, right? Your truck might cost more than mine, right? I've seen break-even point, which is the cost of operation. I've seen break-even points go from $1.65 3 years ago on average, $1.65, $1.85, to skyrocketing in the 220s, 230s.
Yeah, that's what exactly. Right? I remember seeing the 183, now it's like 230 or something.
But Matthew, if your operating cost is at 240 a mile and the National Transportation Index happened over the last 365 days, sub that, what do you expect me to do? How am I going to operate?
God, this is what I love about you bring this up. So like everybody is siloed in their little space. Brokers are here, shippers are here, motor carriers are here. Everyone's arm length. No one has any accountability to each other. And I love using this statistic. The International Road Check is coming in May, I think 14th through 16th. This is the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. This is a blitz of inspections on trucking companies all across the North American continent. And every year, like clockwork, 1 in 5 is out of service. Not go get that fixed later. It's fix it now or it doesn't move. And I think back to my days, when I was defending trucking companies and thinking about this, like if I were to be selling you milk and I had 5 gallons of milk and I said, one of these gallons of milk is unsafe. Which one do you want to buy? You'd say, I would prefer not to buy milk from you, sir. And in our supply chain, you don't get that option necessarily. We have vehicles on the highway now. And when we bring up that Werner case initially, that's why brokers should care. Because if you have a vehicle you hire in to be your, driver for this particular load, you might be on the other side of that liability if something catastrophic happens. So we have as an industry to kind of mutually agree that we have to fix it. But how do you fix it? Like, how does anyone fix something that massive?
I mean, you think about it, and the one thing that aggravates me about this industry is that we always focus and we always operate under, well, this is the way it's always happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So when you think about that, like, I'm gonna make an example, right? A truck that moves and picks up a load of 45,000 pounds of sugar out of South Bay, Florida, and takes that load of sugar up to Columbia, South Carolina, that's only getting paid $1 a mile to do that. It's the same liability and the same work, the same operation, the same risk, the same cost, and the same care that driver has to have for moving a load from West Virginia up to Pennsylvania, getting paid $4 a mile for. So why is there not a foundational, like, hey, you know what? It can't go below. We got federal minimum wage, right?
Yeah, so we do. Oh, absolutely.
Right? There is a minimum wage that I cannot hire Matthew below that minimum wage, regardless of the cost of living in the state that you live in. So you live in New York, you live in Oklahoma, North Dakota, wherever the hell you live at, I still can't pay you less than that. So why do you treat my drivers with the different, like, oh, well, this is Florida, this is just the way it is, or this is Maine, this is just the way it is. Well, the thing about that is that there's a cost associated with that. And sometimes when you skimp out on costs, you are also improving your viewpoint of being put in a situation where you're actually becoming more of a risk. Because, when you hire a carrier and you pay them cheap, now you're going to, sometimes that cost associates directly with the quality of service that you're getting. And that's the thing. The thing that we cannot be continuously thinking about is how we've done things in the past.
That's right.
Oh, well, it's supply and demand. I get it. So it's the workforce is a supply and demand thing too, but you're hiring people and you're paying them based on the skill and the talents that they have. Matthew, you're a phenomenal attorney. And that means that if I wanted to hire you, I have to pay you as such because of your skill, because of your history, because of the cases that you've been in. But you're telling me that with my 24 years of experience and because I've got a phenomenal safety track record, beautiful equipment, you're only going to pay me $1 a mile coming out of Florida regardless? That doesn't matter. No, that doesn't matter because that's the way we've always done things. And unless we come out of that paradigm, it's called a paradigm shift. And the one thing about our industry, we're so far behind. We just started adopting ELD mandates, regardless of whether or not you agree with it or not. That's a technology improvement that we've improved on. But get this. How long have black boxes been in the airline industry, right? We're talking about back in the 60s and the 70s. So the technology, it's our adaptation of certain things and upskilling to that adaptation. Whether or not we agree or we disagree, and whatever it may be, whatever the mandates may be, whatever they're trying to put on the table, we have always been slow in adaptation. We've always been slow in adaptation and getting up to speed. But the thing about it is, even as an industry as a whole, we're always the ones that are getting picked on, and the ones that are always get picked on goes all the way downstream in the whole process of supply chain, and it comes behind the wheel of the truck.
100%, absolutely. The idea, like that, the world that I came from was operations ran the motor fleet. Maintenance and safety were in part of that communication. And when you have the deregulated industry, you have everyone, on their own. That driver is now the compliance department, and they're the safety department and the maintenance department. And we expect so much from them. And then we still know that most of them will lose their businesses in a period of time. Most of them will not truly understand what they're supposed to do. And as American consumers, we demand cheaper stuff. We don't want to pay more for something. And I don't even know how we could solve it outside of regulation, but no one's ever going to say, you have to make sure you get this amount of cost per mile. The idea of hourly pay is compelling. Do you see motor carriers moving in that capacity? I know.
I do, and there's several local carriers, and I've actually consulted with a local carrier that pays hourly pay, but they pay it contingent upon the ELD. You get paid a certain dollar amount on the on-duty line, you get a certain amount of pay on the driving line, and it helps at least provide them with a little bit more consistency from a pay perspective. But that still doesn't solve the problem.
No,
it still doesn't create a unilateral and a universal solution where it at least creates an industry benchmark. One of the things that the industry needs to improve benchmark, especially on driver compensation. Detention pay is not benchmark. There's no benchmark for that. So there's nothing to compare it to. So that means, Leffler's Logistics, whatever they say, hey, I'm only going to pay, this truck, I'm only paying $20 an hour if we detain it after 9 hours. Yeah. Whereas opposed to Wingfield Logistics might be paying $100 an hour after 15 minutes. There's no benchmark for it. When you don't have a benchmark, and again, the one issue with that, and you're an attorney, so you understand, we're deregulated. But now we're asking for more regulation. So what do we want that, or what do we want? And that's
the industry will not make the changes necessary unless there's some catalyst outside of it. And that catalyst may be regulatory, it may be some catastrophic accidents, it may be just some interested lobbyist. I'd be curious to get your opinion on the speed regulator the FMCSA is pushing out. So to the folks who are listening or watching, FMCSA put out a proposed rule. They're going to be looking at regulating speed for essentially all trucks 2003 and newer. And that would essentially entail taking your truck to a facility, having the ECM reprogrammed such that it can't go over a certain speed. What do you think about that?
So I will say this, even as a former driver, and what I mean by that, by a company driver, and then also as an owner operator, every company that I worked for had speed regulators.
That's right.
Right. So, I've worked for companies that had speed regulators where we were only at 62, and I worked for a company where we were at 64. The thing about it is that I was never late. I will tell you this, though, on the flip side of it, one of the things that encouraged me to become an owner operator faster was to get out of that whole speed regulation.
That's right. Exactly. Absolutely.
And that provided me with that, hey, I'm behind the wheel of the truck. I should be able to do this. But here's my concern, Matthew, and I'm going to speak real, right? Everybody should not be moving a truck down the highway at 80 miles an hour. Everybody should not. Everybody doesn't have the candor, the maturity, or the skill to be able to operate that truck at some certain speeds. And what I will tell you, the most telling argument that I've heard about that is to have what they call smart regulators. And what that does is it provides you. So like you always see these Twitter memes where they have two trucks riding side by side.
Yeah, exactly.
So so one of the most compelling arguments for it, and then again, you got to open your ears and your eyes up, and you got to have an open mind. So part of the whole smart regulator was you give a driver a certain amount of time during the day to operate outside of it. So maybe it's 20%. So say you have 20% of your drive shift, you're able to operate in what we call overspeed. So where it allows that truck to speed up. So that way, if you need to pass, if you need to accelerate for whatever reason, you can do so. The concern I have is that when you add speed regulators, now you're going deeper down the hole of providing more regulation.
That's right.
Now it's something else that I've got to, as an independent, that I've got to fight over. It's something else that I have to do. Now, Canada has been operating with speed regulator for quite some time, from what I understand. But my concern is, and I can only look back at experiences that I've had. Man, I was going down. I'll never forget, man. It had to have been about 15 years ago, and I was on my way home, and I was just, parading in the middle lane, going down the highway. I was like 6-lane highway, and I'm, minding my business, and I'm in my personal car. And I looked in the rearview mirror and I saw 4 headlights, on opposite sides, right? And nothing about it. You got 4 headlights behind you, right? 5 seconds later, it got real close. Next thing I know, it was like, poof.
Oh, wow.
It was 2 bull haulers that flew past me, and I swear they had to have been doing over 100 miles an hour racing.
Oh.
And so when I think about that, and I think about the reality that we can all sit here and say, hey, you know what? No regulators, no regulators, no regulators. One thing I want us to think about is you got to look at it from both sides of the fence. Everybody shouldn't have the opportunity to drive a truck over at certain capacities based on your experience. Like if you just had your CDL for a month and a half, you shouldn't be able to ride up and down the highway with 80,000 pounds of steel.
Yeah. Not in the mountains for sure.
Yeah, so this, to me, having a regulator may not be the answer, but we have to think about what the actual. It's getting more costly to be able to, these accidents. Like you said, $130 million on Werner, and it's increasing. But like the value of life is becoming higher just because the value of healthcare is causing that. So when I think about speed regulators, for me. And this is just coming from me, I might not agree with it, but I do understand that it needs to be something that needs to be considered, especially from that side. Now, should it be federally mandated? No. And there's a lot of things that go out that, that may not necessarily. There are guidelines that are put out there that for instance, personal conveyance is not a rule, it's a guideline. Say, hey, you should not do this or you should do this. Here, we're going to give you the guidelines. I don't know what the answer to that is. But I can tell you that everybody, when I think about a piece of equipment, you think about the airline industry being federally mandated, like airplanes can't fly, they have the ability to fly at 1,000 miles an hour, but they don't because they're privatized corporations. But my only concern is that when I look at the motor in public, when I get out here in my 4-wheeler and I'm operating down the highways, do I want to be in that situation? If I had veered over to the left or veered over to the right or did a lanes change that night, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. And those are the things that I look at. You got to be mindful of those things when we start fighting, certain things in discussion.
Yeah. For me, I look at the regulator on speed as number one. There's a great reason to go slow. Like it's great for maintenance. It's great for fuel. It's great for a safer moving vehicle typically. But if you're a driver being paid by the mile, your compensation is tied to how long it takes you to get there. And it's really pulling money out of the hands of drivers to make them all go slow. And my opinion of stuff tends to be around, the mega fleets are already governing their trucks. They have them at a certain level. They're keeping them at that level. They want everyone else to go the same speed. So a lot of the big fleets are pushing for this regulation as well. And for me, every state already has speed regulation. Like you're a professional driver. You should be able to go the speed that you believe is safe in those conditions. And I don't like to see regulation jumping in at something like this, because beyond the fact of having the control over the driver, now you have to go retrofit your entire fleet. Like you can do some remote programming, but you're still going to be in the weeds at shops doing this. And it's expensive to get this into a diesel shop to get operated. So I hope we see some reasonableness to it, whether it's 68, 65, who knows, but I don't doubt that we're going to see this in the next few years. I would be very curious to get your thoughts around the idea of increasing the limits of insurance for motor carriers.
So 1984 or 85 was the last time we had insurance was at $750,000. But back in 1984 or 1985, you think about surgeries and you think about the cost of living, and you talked about it. Hey, back in those days, surgery was cost less. Sick care is less. Healthcare has increased. Hospital stays have increased. I can understand the need to increase because, you get in an accident and it could be an accident that puts somebody out of work for, a month or so. And, maybe they shatter a femur or something like that. You're talking about 800,000, 900,000, those you're six, almost 7-figure accidents. Who's on the hook for that? And so here's the thing. We can, again, Matthew, we've got to look at it from two sides. At the end of the day, that you're still a human being that goes out on the highways too after you get from behind the wheel of a truck. What happens if somebody in your family or you get involved in an accident and there's a limit? All I'm supposed to have is $1 million. All of a sudden, you have an accident that with all of the doctor bills and rehabilitation and lost wages, and you start getting into that ball game. It'll always far exceed the $1 million liability.
Absolutely.
I will say this: don't increase that liability and expect to to compound premiums, and that's my concern. I don't mind the increasing of the liability limits. My concern is the compoundingness of the actual cost of what it's going to cost from an insurance perspective. When you look at insurance as a whole, insurance is one of the biggest, just honestly, one of your biggest fixed expenses is your insurance. Your insurance premium per unit can be $20,000 a year. And the auto liability side is the heaviest component side of it, which is that $1 million piece of it. Are we going to double the actual premium if we have to double that to $2 million?
That's what I think is going to happen. I think that's what would have to happen.
There's no way.
It's impossible.
There's no way. There's no way. Then you're talking about putting a lot of people out of business, because there's a lot of folks that are operating under a 10% margin. They're operating on a 9-8% margin, and you double insurance, and it's
even the best motor carriers in the world right now in this environment are running operating ratios of like 97%. Like, it is brutal. I'll give a quick anecdote. Like, years ago in my past life as a lawyer representing trucking companies, I had a trucking company that was found liable for about $800,000 or so of damages. The owner operator had $750,000 policy. And after the insurance company tendered the policy, which is essentially the insurance company says, yep, here's the $750,000. The driver's like, well, where's the other 50,000 going to come from? Well, it's going to come from you. The plaintiff is going to lean on your house, lean on your car. They're going to take the money from you. And like, well, I'm going to go bankrupt. Yes, that's what's going to happen. Like, I'm sorry. The insurance company, our only obligation is the policy limit. And we have tendered that limit. Now you have to deal with it. And I think as an industry, we don't really educate a lot of drivers around what happens when the insurance is maxed out. That's why I usually advocate for getting an umbrella policy. It's cheaper than just increasing the normal limit. You can get a separate policy that gives you a little bit more coverage. With our company, with Outsource, my father's business, we had $1 million policy and a $4 million umbrella, because we know what happens. Like, you break a pelvis, you break a leg, that's going to cost you $500,000. It's just the nature of medical care. And I love how you understand this business, both from the operational side, but also from like this is how a business has to deal with these things, because you, in the world of law, like the worst case scenario is the only scenario. Like, I don't live in the world of everything went great. No, that's not how that works. You don't call me if everything's going well. And I love how you've kind of outlined, like, there's no margin for motor carriers to take on that additional risk. They don't have that capability. So as motoring public, we have underinsured vehicles. We have vehicles that are not properly maintained, but thank goodness we have things on the shelves. Like, it makes me sick to my stomach to think about how this ultimately plays out over the next few years.
It's scary. 20%, like you said, 20% of every single truck that's going up and down the highway right now is considered unsafe by the FMCSA. 8%, 8 out of every 100 drivers that are behind the wheel of a truck are considered at this very moment are considered shouldn't be behind the wheel, just from an hours of service perspective. We've lost 120,000 drivers to the drug testing protocols that the overall the clearinghouse has put out there. There is so many moving targets that really kind of steer and misguide the industry at some point. And it's like the smaller carriers don't have the resources to stay ahead. They don't have necessarily those things that they can stay in front of things. There's content out there that's being delivered, but they're not going to have the compliance teams, the compliance partners, the safety teams, the driver training. They just don't have those things. And then when we look at every time we turn around the corner, there's something else that's coming down the pipeline.
It never stops. It never stops.
And it's always like the FMCSA is looking directly at you, Matthew, the driver, and figuring out. And I hate to be that person. And I don't get into politics. I don't do any of that. But it always seems like the easiest mode to make change is to make it a little bit more harder for Matthew, the driver, to be able to do things. And they really haven't fixed anything. We got 20%, 2 out of 10 trucks going up and down the highway right now that are not safe. But we're not doing anything to fix that, but put them out of service and say, hey, you know what? Call a wrecker and fix it. Right? There's no progression there.
I fundamentally believe, and this is a highly controversial statement, so everyone who's watching, please note this is controversial. The FMCSA should mandate 2 inspections a year. I get it. In FMCSA, we do 1 federal inspection on your equipment every single year. California has a 4 inspection a year called the BIT program. It's quarterly inspections. But to operate a commercial vehicle over the road, interstate, you're looking at one mandatory inspection a year. And the big motor carriers do not do that. They inspect their stuff more often than that. LTL's more than truckload, but truckload still does more than once a year.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you think that's a reasonable thing?
I'm gonna give you one more. I'm gonna take yours and I'm gonna raise you one.
Oh,
I think that there needs to be a mandate, put out, and this is probably controversial too. So what if I told you, Matthew, I want you to get on a Wingfield Airlines, right? Everybody's seated and you're sitting in first class, and I'm getting ready to get over the intercom and say, hey, this is your pilot speaking. This is our first maiden voyage. By the way, we haven't had a federal inspection or any safety inspectors look at anything, but we haven't had a safety audit or anything. But I promise you, Matthew, everything's going to be good, okay? Would you stay in that seat or would you leave?
I don't like being on a plane under any circumstances, so I am out of that.
I forgot. That. You're out. You're done. But Matthew, you can start a trucking company today, and you won't receive your new entrant safety audit till probably 2025. There's no new entrant safety protocol. Which, granted, there are components of the new entrant safety audit that are administrative and clerical. I get it, but there's also parts of that new entrant safety audit that guides you. Hours of service, right? Making sure that you're doing that right. Your ELD, that you have a proper ELD and it's a working device, where you actually have an annual inspection on both of your truck and your trailer. Why are we doing a federal new entrant safety, SAFETY, which the FMCS stands for safety?
That's right.
A agency, right? Why are we doing a mandatory new entrant safety audit a year after the carrier actually starts their operation?
Adam, there's a driver shortage. Did you not hear about this?
There is a driver shortage.
We need more meat for the grinder.
I'm sure there is a driver shortage. That's the reason why that there's no driver shortage. It's the biggest myth in the world.
I will say there is a shortage of drivers willing to work for the wages and conditions currently being offered.
And there's a shortage of drivers that's willing to stay with a company when they're not able to provide benefits and things like that. And they're progressively looking. If you go work for any type of corporation in America, you're always going to have standards and you're going to have places to go. You don't have the glass ceilings that you see in the trucking industry. Why would I? It's the same poop every day that I'm dealing with, but it's just a different toilet to sit on. And that's the thing that drives me nuts.
What are some real things that drivers can do today to reduce their operating costs? Like, what can they do?
Let me tell you something. The first thing that you can do, and you're going to hate this, but the first thing you can do is slow down, right? So the difference, there's two things that drive your operational costs within fuel. Fuel is your highest variable expense, but there's two things that drive fuel, right? You got number one, which is station selection, and number two, which is fuel consumption. Those are two things that you control. Matthew, you control what station that you go to and how you consume your fuel. So let me tell you this. The difference between a truck moving at, down a highway for 100,000 miles at 7.4 miles per gallon versus 6.5 miles per gallon is about 10,000, anywhere between. So you're going to operate about 14,000 gallons of diesel fuel that you're going to need. You multiply that 14,000 gallons of diesel fuel. Now you multiply that by the cost of whatever diesel fuel is at the pump. Now you can spend anywhere between $60,000 to $80,000 on diesel fuel a year just by changing how you operate. So I tell you, that's one of the easiest things that you can do is slow the heck down, making sure your tires are properly inflated and have a really keen thumbprint on your overall consumption of fuel. The second thing is that you got to make sure that you're getting the fuel discounts. The average price per gallon of diesel fuel right now is $4.11. If you're paying above $4.11 right now, and if you're not paying significantly less, if you're not in a 370 or 380, you need to get a fuel card. Stop paying with your Amex card. Stop paying with your debit card because you're not getting the discounts that you need. And it's amazing how much money that you can save by just doing that. And I won't touch negotiation strategies, learning on how to be a better negotiator, reading the book to teach you to be a better negotiator on the phone when you're negotiating rates with a broker. We won't even talk about that. I just want you to focus on those couple variable expenses when you look at that. And then when you set yourself up and start, when you get started, there's certain expenses that you got to live by and you got to die by. When you buy a truck, you got to live by the expense. When you get insurance and buying insurance, you got to live by it. You can't change it. So when I make that selection, when I sign my name on a dotted line for that truck, that payment that I'm signing for, right, that nice shiny square hood Peterbilt that's going to cost me $3,700 a month, might be a better idea for me just get that cascaded. And I'm able to get for $1,800 a month, and I'm able to make the same money on the road.
Let me ask you this. What about like driver facing cameras as a way to offset insurance costs? Like, I love this topic because it's yeah. Okay, go. All
right. So let me talk about that a little bit.
When I want to watch all the drivers all the time. That's what I want.
And so Here's what I'll say. There's intrusion there, right? Because that's your driver's safe space.
Yeah.
You know, that's your driver's home. That's your driver's home from way. I understand, like when I saw that Amazon, I'm sure that viral.
Yeah, they were all looking at it inside the warehouse. Absolutely.
And when you look at that, you're able to see what happened to accident. So I've seen situations, and we provided evidence in situations from a dash cam perspective, where the driver is simply eating a sandwich on his cell phone in the middle of an accident, like that caused the accident. So I do see the need to have that incident-based type of recording. Mm-hmm. But again, here we go with more regulations. You know, now I need to see your dash cams at all times. So, okay, you know what? We don't already trust you, right?
Exactly.
We don't trust you already as it is. You want my location. You want my ELD connections. You want to see what I'm doing at all times. You want to make sure that I can download any app that you want on my. It's just so much that when it comes to a conspiracy perspective, and if you're a conspiracy theorist, then obviously it's like they just want more access.
Once you give up your freedom, you never get it back.
You never get it back.
You never get it back. I remember a major for-hire motor carrier was being presented. They were pushing driver-facing cameras, and they were non-union. And the minute they said they're going to do driver-facing cameras, the union bell started sounding. They said, "Never mind, forget it. We're just kidding. We're just kidding." But as you outlined with the Amazon case, that's what they do with owner-operators. It's okay. Here's how it's going to work. You do this technology, or you get out of our company.
Somewhere else. Yeah,
exactly. And so, I look at this, and it's one of those really frustrating things, because the encroachment of technology around us, that freedom, that call of the open road, it is not as free as it used to be. It's not the same job that it was 45 years ago.
It's not. And I remember, way back, when I was driving, there were things that, your mega carriers, obviously when you work for a company, you work for somebody, you got to follow their rules, and the thing about it is like with the Amazon case, when you're going to latch onto a 3PL and you're going to pull their freight, then unfortunately you got to follow their rules. I get it. I understand that, it's just the way it goes. But when you talk about dual face, there's definitely a benefit to road facing cameras.
100%. Absolutely.
Hands down. Hands down. I can tell you that you've probably litigated cases where, the camera saved one side or the other. So I get that. But when you come to the inside, are you, now you're wanting the access to me. You got to think about this, even from it's like having cameras in a bathroom. It's like you got cameras in the hallway, so somebody's going through the hallway, but you really need to get that close, and do you really need to get inside of that situation? There's some cases that I've seen where hey, I'm glad they had an in-facing dash camera, and then there's some cases where they're like, they're like, well, this is my personal, my private time.
It's all about this. It's all about that supercomputer we have in our pocket, and were you looking at it when the accident happened or the heartbreaking event took place? If you were, advising any truckers or people who would be truckers, like, should they get into the business now, or is it something you should wait until markets rebound? What is the outlook for people getting into this industry?
This is not double Dutch. So this is not one of those things where you go, okay, I'm gonna get it now. Can I get it now? Should I get it now? Should I get it now? No, it's not double Dutch. It's with any entrepreneurial journey, there's going to be time that you're going to be prepared to enter into your journey. And the times that I recommend that is that you have obviously you have the capacity, right? You got the time to invest, because entrepreneurship is hard, man. Trucking entrepreneurship is harder. We're the only people in the world that'll work 120, 140 hours a week just so we won't have to work 40-hour weeks for somebody else.
Yeah,
entrepreneurship is very, very hard. You need to have a nest egg. Like, this is a cash heavy business. This is cash capital business. At any point you you have a DPF system, one box go out, it's going to cost you $13,000-$14,000 to replace.
Oh man,
you got to have that. You have to have capital. Right. So regardless of what time you enter the industry, you can enter the industry. Listen, Matthew, people jumped into the industry back in 2021 and 2020 when rates were $3.90, $3.95, $4 a mile in some cases, and they still went out of business.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So there is no perfect time to get in the industry. Is there a perfect opportunity? No. But there's a time for everybody. Everybody has a preparation time, and there's a time for everybody to join the race. And sometimes, some investors, I call it an investor, but some investors, entrepreneur, they want to go when the market's low, right? I want to get in when the market's low, interest rates low. I can get a truck now, Matthew, for $40,000. But if you go back to 2021, it was costing me $120,000.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. We saw dry vans that were normally 30 grand new going for $80,000. It was bonkers. It was bonkers.
So I know that was that. So now we should ask ourselves, was that a great time to get into business? So that's the thing that you got to think about.
Wasn't for Convoy, it seemed, or Yellow. They've been around for a minute.
Well, yeah, that's very true. But even though that, Flexport was able to kind of resurrect the devil.
That's interesting. Well, one thing I mentioned this a second ago, I'll piggyback off this, is the idea of the emission systems on modern trucks.
Yes.
A lot of people kind of forget, well, they don't know, but like the way it works is the regulators are like, hey, there's a lot of stuff coming off that stack. We should try to burn that stuff too. And so what that basically was, they take the exhaust gas and they have to cool it because it's too hot. So you have an EGR cooler, cooler to cool the exhaust gas. Then you go through a filter, a diesel particulate filter, and then it goes back into the motor. They get some DEF, which is a mixture of urea and other chemicals, and then they recombust it. And like that filter is like $3,000. So if that filter breaks, this was a thing that did not exist 15 years ago. So the cost of operating manifestly changed and it became far more computery than it was before. What is something you're very excited about in this business right now?
Well, I'm just always excited about the demand of assets and drivers will always be there. There is never going to, I am always forever excited about the opportunity to be an entrepreneur is going to always, it will never be any greater than it is now. The barrier entry is still the same as it was 20 years ago. I'm still excited and I'm still committed to helping navigate through that change because there's still a reason to be excited about. Are there things that there are adjustments and are there things that are happening that are outside of our control? Yeah, absolutely. But there's a lot of things that are operationally sound there within your controls that you can absolutely control. And there's some things that you can absolutely do, and there's some things that you shouldn't do within the business. You talked about the DPF system. It's like a huge science experiment that happens every time when it goes down the highway. That's right. And the crazy thing about it is when it first started, just like with anything else, when you go through anything else, you never buy the first thing to happen. Ask International about their Max Force engines.
I love that Max Force. That was a great truck.
That great old Max Force engine. So think about that. But no, in all seriousness, I'm always forever excited about the opportunity within the industry because I get to help people. I've got the greatest job in the world. I get to help people. I get to take my experiences, and I'm not the expert. I'm not the guru. I'm not the god of this thing, but I've done pretty well, and I want to help people do pretty well too. So I'm excited that people are still wanting to do well, and people are still getting into the industry. But I'm so excited that there's more information. There's more people that they can lean on. Because when I started, Matthew, there was no YouTube. There was no Facebook. There was no social media, right? So there was none of that stuff. So I had to figure this out on my own. I had to ask people in truck stops, like how to do this, how to do that. I had to, when I'm washing my clothes, I see the dollar truck board up on the screen, and I had to call brokers on the board because we didn't have the mobile app. So I'm excited in the advancements that we've made. Absolutely. Are there things or challenges that I think that are going to be hurdles more so than things that are going to be, roadblocks? Yeah, I mean, we're track runners. We know what that looks like.
Yeah, we didn't need to talk about that. I feel bad. We're missed. We're a little bit over, but let me just say, what was your race of choice, Adam? What was your race?
I was a 4x guy, but my race of choice was a 200. Now I can burn 100 now. Don't get me wrong, but the 200, I will set you up in the corner. I run that curve and I make you think everything's good. You put me on the back straightaway and you can forget about it.
Well, I know we have a relay team we're building. You, myself, we have Ben Gordon line. We need one more person, and then presumably I'll blow my hamstrings out in the first couple steps.
Well, I was hoping that you would get an Icy Hot sponsor for the race. We can secure Icy Hot as a sponsor. I think will be good.
I'll try and get DAT. I think they're willing to maybe help us out with that. But Icy Hot is something we absolutely need. Absolutely. Where can people find more about you and your business? How can they reach out to you to start working with you?
So LinkedIn is one of the best things. I'm always on LinkedIn, but also you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Adam L. Wingfield. You can find me on Instagram at Adam L. Wingfield. I love to have the opportunity to really kind of post content and kind of give tips on Instagram. So that's one of my favorite platforms of choice. Or you can go to our website. It's www.thetruckingconsultants.com.
I will make sure that all of that is in the show notes. I just got myself an Instagram, haven't posted anything. I'll try eventually. I don't know how these social media things work. I'm just a humble country lawyer. I don't know.
Nothing wrong with that, man.
Well, Adam, I cannot thank you enough for making time today to come in and talk about your vast experience in this business. I think you are one of the leading voices. We have some great comments. We'll have to kind of address those down the road, but I want to just thank you again for making time to come in and talk to me. So thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate you.
Anytime. Thank you for having me, Matthew.
All right. And that's it, everybody. We're at the end. That's the full thing. Let me just say, this industry needs your support. How can you help truck drivers? Well, you can give them plenty of space. Don't text and drive. Keep away. This is not a safe thing to be near if they're on the road operating an 80,000-pound machine. Give drivers as much space as you can, and understand that this is one of the most common jobs of all people in this country, and it remains one of the top 7 most dangerous jobs in the country, but it is essential. We need drivers, we need brokers, we need manufacturers, and we need everybody to better understand what is at stake in the transportation of things all across the country. We end by saying thank you once again to our sponsor. We got that one there, DAT. Since 1978, helping get motor carriers home safely, finding ways to get profitable loads to drivers, and find ways to make this supply chain more efficient. We need all the help we can get. As always, thank you for tuning in. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. We love it. If you do that, give us a rating if you could. Again, that'd be very helpful. As always, it is a pleasure to be here and talk to you about this industry that I absolutely love. And with that, have a great day.